"I can't wait to see my daughter in her wedding dress," I commented to my grandson. He smirked cruelly. "Grandma, are you crazy? She got married yesterday. You weren't invited. It was only 200 people. A month later, they lost everything and begged me for a place to stay." My answer made her cry for hours. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I can't wait to see my daughter in her wedding dress," I said to my grandson Justin as he sat across from me at my small kitchen table, picking at the chocolate chip cookies I'd baked fresh that morning. At 18, he was tall and lean like his grandfather had been, but there was something in his eyes that reminded me more of his mother Tatum, a coldness that seemed to grow stronger each year. Justin looked up from his phone, and for a moment, I thought I saw something flicker across his face. Then he smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile I remembered from when he was little. This smile was different, cruel. "Grandma, are you losing your mind?" he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "She got married yesterday. You weren't invited. There were only 200 people there." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face as I stared at him, waiting for the punchline that never came. The kitchen seemed to tilt around me, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "What did you say?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Justin's smile widened, and I realized with growing horror that he was enjoying this. "Mom's wedding was yesterday, Grandma. Big fancy affair at the country club. Flowers everywhere, open bar, live band. She looked beautiful in her dress, the one that cost more than you probably make in 6 months. My hands began to tremble. I set down my coffee cup before I could drop it. "That's not possible. Tatum would have told me. She would have invited me. Would she?" Justin leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was some kind of fascinating specimen. "When was the last time she actually called you? Not you calling her, but her calling you?" I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. When had Tatum last called me? Christmas? My birthday? I couldn't remember. "She's been planning this wedding for 8 months, Justin continued, his voice casual as if he were discussing the weather. "Everything had to be perfect. The right venue, the right people, the right image. The implication hung in the air like poison. I wasn't the right image." "I helped with her wedding," I managed to say, my voice cracking. "I gave her my grandmother's pearls for something old. I helped her pick out invitations online. She said she wanted me to walk her down the aisle since your grandfather isn't here anymore." Justin laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Grandma, you really believed all that? She took your pearls, sure. But walk her down the aisle? Her new stepfather did that. Richard Blackwood. You know, the guy with the Mercedes and the vacation house in the Hamptons." I felt like I was drowning. Each word Justin spoke pushed me further under the surface, away from air, away from hope. "She's been engaged for 2 years, I said weakly. "She told me the wedding was still being planned. She said they wanted to wait until..." "Until what? Until you weren't around anymore?" Justin's eyes glittered with malicious amusement. "Face it, Grandma, you're embarrassing to her. This shabby little house, your secondhand clothes, the way you clip coupons and shop at thrift stores. Do you really think she wanted her new in-laws to meet you?" The cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. This was my grandson, the little boy I'd rocked to sleep, the child I'd taught to ride a bike, the teenager I'd helped with homework when Tatum was too busy with her social life. Now he sat in my kitchen, systematically destroying my world with the precision of a surgeon. She loves me," I whispered. But even as I said the words, they felt hollow. "Love?" Justin snorted. "Maybe, but not enough to risk her perfect new life. Do you know how much this wedding cost? $75,000. Her new husband paid for everything. You think she wanted to explain to his family why her mother lives in a rental house and drives a 15-year-old Honda? I thought about my car in the driveway, the one I'd bought used 5 years ago with money I'd saved for months. I thought about this house, the little 2-bedroom rental I'd called home for the past decade since I could no longer afford the mortgage on the family home after my husband died. I thought about the clothes in my closet, most of them from discount stores or purchased secondhand. When had I become something to be ashamed of? The reception was incredible. Justin continued, seemingly oblivious to my pain. Prime rib, lobster, champagne that cost more per bottle than you spend on groceries in a month. Mom looked like a princess, a real princess, not the kind that shops at Walmart. I closed my eyes, trying to block out his words, but they kept coming. She has a new life now. A big house in Westfield, a country club membership, a husband who can actually provide for her. She doesn't need. He gestured around my modest kitchen with its outdated appliances and mismatched dishes. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the tick of the clock on the wall, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic. Normal sounds of a normal day, except nothing about this day was normal anymore. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked, my voice hollow. Justin shrugged. "Because you need to know where you stand." Mom's moving on, and frankly, so am I. I'm starting college in the fall. A real college, not community college. Private, expensive. My new step-grandfather is helping with tuition. He stood up, brushing cookie crumbs from his shirt. "Thanks for the cookies, Grandma, but don't expect me to visit much anymore. I'll be pretty busy with my new life, too." I watched him walk toward the front door, my heart breaking with each step he took. At the doorway, he turned back one last time. "Oh, and Grandma, Mom said to tell you that if you're thinking about causing any drama about not being invited, don't. She's happy now, really happy. For the first time in her life, she doesn't have to worry about being dragged down by family obligations." The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the silence of my empty house. I sat there for a long time, staring at the 2 coffee cups on the table, the plate of cookies that would go uneaten, the morning light streaming through windows that suddenly seemed dimmer than before. My daughter had gotten married yesterday. While I was here, alone, watching television and thinking about calling her to see how her week was going, the realization hit me in waves. The lies, the deliberate exclusion, the careful way she'd been pulling away from me for months, maybe years, without me even noticing. I'd been so grateful for any contact with her that I'd missed all the signs. My beautiful Tatum, the little girl I'd raised alone after her father died when she was 12, had erased me from the most important day of her life. And worse, she'd sent my own grandson to deliver the news with all the compassion of a tax collector. I put my head in my hands and finally let the tears come. The house felt different after Justin left, smaller somehow, as if the walls had crept closer while I wasn't looking. I walked through the rooms like a ghost, touching familiar objects that suddenly seemed foreign. The framed photos of Tatum's high school graduation, her college diploma ceremony, birthdays and holidays where she'd smiled for the camera but always seemed eager to leave. I stopped in front of the mantelpiece where a picture of Tatum at age 16 sat in a silver frame. My Christmas gift to myself that year because I couldn't afford much else. She was laughing in the photo, her head thrown back, joy radiating from every feature. When had that joy stopped including me? My fingers traced the glass as memories flooded back, each one now tainted with the bitter knowledge of how this story would end. I remembered the night David died. Tatum was 12, just a kid really, and I was 34 years old with no idea how to be both mother and father. The cancer had taken him quickly, 6 months from diagnosis to funeral, and left us with medical bills that swallowed our savings and then some. The life insurance barely covered the funeral costs. I had to sell David's car, his tools, anything of value just to keep the house, but even that wasn't enough. I remember sitting at this same kitchen table, surrounded by bills and rejection letters from loan companies, wondering how I was going to keep us afloat. That's when I started working double shifts at the diner downtown. Breakfast and lunch shift, then cleaning offices at night. I'd get home around midnight, set my alarm for 5 in the morning, and start all over again. Tatum learned to get herself ready for school, to heat up the dinners I'd prepare on Sundays for the whole week. "You're never here," she'd complained one evening when she was 14. I'd just walked in the door at 11:30 p.m., exhausted and reeking of grease and industrial cleaner. "I'm working so we can stay in this house," I'd replied, too tired to soften my tone. "So you can stay in the same school with your friends?" She'd rolled her eyes. "My friends' moms don't have to work 3 jobs. Her words had stung, but I pushed the hurt aside. She was just a teenager. She didn't understand. How could she understand that every hour I worked was an hour I chose her over my own exhaustion? that every paycheck went toward her school supplies, her clothes, the little luxuries that made her feel normal when nothing about our life was normal anymore. When she started high school, I picked up a fourth job cleaning houses on weekends. Tatum wanted to join the debate team, which meant travel expenses and tournament fees. She wanted to take AP classes, which required books and supplies I couldn't afford. She wanted to fit in with her classmates, most of whom lived in houses with 2 parents and 2 incomes. I gave her what she wanted. Always. There was the winter when the heating bill was so high I had to choose between warmth and groceries. I chose groceries and wore sweaters to bed for 3 months. Tatum never went without heat in her room. I'd moved her space heater from my bedroom to hers without telling her. There was the time she wanted to go on the school trip to Washington, D.C. $200 I didn't have. I took an extra cleaning job at a medical office, working until 2 a.m. for 2 weeks straight to earn the money. She came home with pictures and stories, glowing with excitement, never asking how I'd managed to pay for it. When she was 16 and desperately wanted a car like her friends, I worked extra shifts for 8 months to save for a down payment on a used Honda. Not new, not fancy, but reliable and safe. She'd hugged me that day. Actually hugged me. And for a moment, I felt like maybe I was doing something right. But even that joy was complicated. I remember overhearing her on the phone with a friend. "It's not the car I wanted, but at least I won't have to ride the bus anymore. Maybe now I can actually have a social life." Not the car she wanted. Those words had cut deep, but I'd swallowed the hurt. At least she was happy, I told myself. At least she could fit in better now. College was the hardest sacrifice of all. Tatum had her heart set on State University, and while it wasn't Harvard, it wasn't cheap either. She qualified for some financial aid, but there was still a gap. A big gap. I remember the night she got her acceptance letter. She danced around the kitchen, spinning and laughing, and for that moment she was my little girl again. "I'm going to college, Mom. I'm really going." What she didn't know was that I'd already been planning. I'd taken out a second mortgage on the house, the one that would eventually force me to sell it after she graduated. I'd sold my wedding ring, David's grandmother's ring that I'd treasured, to a pawn shop downtown. I'd cashed in my small retirement account, paying penalties that made me sick to my stomach. But she was going to college. My daughter, the first in our family to go to college, was going to have opportunities I never had. During her 4 years at State, I sent her money every month. Money for textbooks, for clothes, for the social activities that kept her connected to her classmates. Money I earned by taking on extra work, by skipping meals, by patching my clothes instead of buying new ones. She'd call sometimes, usually when she needed something. "Mom, there's this really important networking event, but I need a new dress." "Mom, my laptop died, and I need a new one for classes." "Mom, my sorority is having a formal, and I need to contribute to the group gift for our house mother." I always said yes, always found a way. She graduated summa cum laude. I was so proud that day, sitting in the hot sun in the uncomfortable bleacher seats, watching her walk across that stage. She looked so beautiful, so accomplished, so far beyond the scared 12-year-old who'd lost her father. After graduation, she got a good job in marketing at a firm downtown. She moved into a nice apartment, started building a life that looked nothing like the one I'd provided for her. And slowly, gradually, I began to see less and less of her. "I'm really busy with work, Mom," became her standard excuse for missing Sunday dinners. "I'm dating someone now, so my weekends are pretty full," explained why she couldn't visit as often. "I'm trying to establish myself professionally, so I need to focus on networking events and career development," was why she couldn't make it to my birthday dinner. I told myself it was natural. She was young, building her future. Of course she was busy. Of course she had priorities beyond her old mother. But deep down, I started to wonder if I'd become an embarrassment to her. If my small rental house and secondhand furniture were reminders of a life she'd rather forget. If the sacrifices I'd made to give her better opportunities had somehow made me less worthy of her time. When she got engaged to Michael 2 years ago, I was so happy. Not just because she'd found love, but because I thought maybe this would bring us closer together. Wedding planning, mother-daughter shopping trips, all those moments I'd seen in movies and dreamed about. But even the engagement had been managed at arm's length. She'd called to tell me the news rather than visiting. She'd sent me photos of the ring via text instead of showing it to me in person. When I asked about wedding plans, she was always vague. We're still figuring things out. Nothing's decided yet. We want to take our time and do it right. Now I understood. They had been doing it right, for their new life, their new social circle, their new identity that didn't include the woman who'd sacrificed everything to make it possible. I walked back to the kitchen and sat down at the table, staring at the empty chair where Justin had delivered his cruel news. Somewhere across town, my daughter was probably waking up as a newlywed, maybe opening gifts or packing for a honeymoon I'd never hear about. The irony was almost unbearable. I'd spent 18 years making sure she had everything she needed to build a better life than mine, and I'd succeeded. She had built a better life. She'd just built it without me. A month passed in a haze of sleepless nights and empty days. I'd stopped answering my phone after the first week, unable to bear the cheerful voices of neighbors asking about Tatum's big day, or old friends wanting to know why I hadn't posted any wedding photos on Facebook. How do you explain that your own daughter erased you from the most important day of her life? I was sorting through bills at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning when I heard car doors slamming in my driveway. The sound was sharp and urgent, followed by hurried footsteps on my front porch. Before I could even get up from my chair, someone was pounding on my door. "Grandma! Grandma! Please open the door!" Justin's voice, but not the cruel, mocking tone from a month ago. This voice was desperate, cracking with panic. I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob, remembering the last words he'd spoken to me. "Grandma, please, we need help." "We?" I unlocked the door and pulled it open, and the sight that greeted me nearly knocked me backward. Justin stood on my porch, but he looked nothing like the confident, cruel young man who'd sat in my kitchen delivering news of my exclusion. His clothes were wrinkled and dirty, his hair unwashed, his eyes red-rimmed and wild. Behind him, slumped against my porch railing, was Tatum. My daughter looked like she'd aged 10 years in 30 days. Her usually perfect blonde hair hung in greasy strands around her face. Her designer clothes, the ones that had cost more than my monthly grocery budget, were stained and rumpled. She was crying, not the delicate tears of a woman who worried about her makeup, but the raw, ugly sobs of someone whose world had completely fallen apart. "Mom," she whispered when she saw me, and the word came out broken, like a prayer from someone who'd lost faith long ago. I stood there frozen, taking in the scene. Behind them in my driveway sat an old pickup truck that had seen better days, rust eating away at the wheel wells, one taillight held in place with duct tape. Nothing like the luxury cars I'd seen in Justin's social media posts from the wedding. "What's going on?" I asked, though part of me already knew. When someone shows up at your door looking like the world has ended, there's usually only one reason. "Can we come in?" Justin asked, and the arrogance was completely gone from his voice. "Please, we don't have anywhere else to go." I stepped aside, and they shuffled into my living room like refugees. Tatum collapsed onto my old couch, the same couch she'd once complained was embarrassing when her college friends visited, and buried her face in her hands. Justin remained standing, shifting from foot to foot like a child who knew he was in trouble. "Sit down," I told him, gesturing to the chair across from Tatum. "Both of you, and tell me what happened." Justin looked at Tatum, but she was lost in her crying. He took a shaky breath and began to speak. "Michael left her," he said simply. 3 days after they got back from their honeymoon in Italy, I felt a twist in my stomach that had nothing to do with satisfaction and everything to do with maternal instinct. Whatever Tatum had done to me, seeing her in this kind of pain was still devastating. "Left her?" I repeated. "What do you mean?" "I mean he packed his bags and moved out," Justin said, his voice getting stronger as he talked. "Turns out he'd been planning it for months. The whole marriage was a scam." Tatum's sobbing got louder, and I moved to sit beside her on the couch, my body acting on 28 years of maternal conditioning before my brain could stop it. She leaned into me immediately, and despite everything, I found myself stroking her hair the way I had when she was little and had nightmares. "Tell me everything," I said to Justin, my voice gentler now. Justin sat down heavily in the chair. "Michael never loved her," he began. The whole relationship was fake. He's this serial con artist who targets women from middle-class families who are trying to move up in the world. He studies them, figures out what they want, then becomes exactly that person. My blood ran cold. What did he want from her? Access, Justin said bitterly. Mom had been working at Morrison & Associates for 3 years. She had access to client files, financial records, insider information about company mergers and acquisitions. Michael's real business was selling that information to competitors. I closed my eyes, the full picture starting to come together. And Tatum gave it to him? She didn't know what she was doing, Justin said quickly, defending his mother even now. He convinced her that sharing work stories was normal between married couples. He'd ask casual questions about her day, about clients, about deals the company was working on. She thought he was just being interested in her life. Tatum pulled away from me and wiped her nose on her sleeve, something the old Tatum would never have done. I loved him, she said, her voice hoarse. I really loved him, Mom, and he made me feel like I was finally somebody important, somebody worth loving. The words hit me like a slap. Finally, somebody worth loving. As if I hadn't loved her every day of her life. As if every sacrifice I'd made hadn't been an act of love. When did you find out? I asked. Last Friday, Tatum said. I came home early from work and found him packing. At first I thought he was going on a business trip, but then I saw that he was taking everything. His clothes, his personal items, even things I'd bought him as gifts. She started crying harder. I asked him what was happening and he just laughed. He actually laughed at me, Mom. He said the job was done and he was moving on to the next target. He called me pathetic. He said I was so desperate to escape my trashy background that I'd made it easy for him. My hands clenched into fists. Whatever anger I felt toward Tatum, the protective fury I felt toward anyone who hurt my child was stronger. He took everything, Justin continued. All the wedding gifts, all the money from Mom's savings account that she'd put his name on, even her car. He said since they were legally married, he had a right to community property. What about the police? I asked. Tatum shook her head. Michael was smart. Technically, nothing he did was illegal. I gave him the information willingly, even if I didn't understand what he was going to use it for. The money in the account was legally his to access. The car was in both our names. And my job, she added miserably. When they found out about the information leak, they fired me immediately. No references, no severance package, nothing. My reputation in the industry is destroyed. No one will hire me. I looked around my small living room, taking in the scope of the disaster. My daughter, who had been so ashamed of me that she'd excluded me from her own wedding, was now sitting on my second-hand couch with no job, no money, no home, and no prospects. Where have you been staying? I asked. With friends at first, Justin said. But that only lasted a few days. Mom was too embarrassed to explain what happened, and without being able to contribute to expenses. They got tired of us pretty quickly, Tatum finished. Rich people don't like having poor relatives hanging around reminding them that it could happen to them too. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. The same people Tatum had been so eager to impress, the ones whose opinion had mattered more than mine, had turned their backs on her the moment she became inconvenient. We've been sleeping in the truck for the past week, Justin admitted. Showering at the gym when we can afford day passes, eating at soup kitchens. Mom kept saying she'd figure something out, that she had friends who would help, but they all disappeared when the money did, Tatum said quietly. Amazing how quickly your social circle shrinks when you can't afford to keep up anymore. I sat back against the couch cushions, trying to process everything I'd just heard. A month ago, my daughter had been living in a mansion, married to a successful businessman, part of an exclusive social circle that had been worth excluding her own mother from. Now she was homeless, jobless, and abandoned by everyone she'd thought cared about her. Mom, Tatum said suddenly, turning to look at me with eyes that reminded me of the 12-year-old who'd cried in my arms the night her father died. I know I don't deserve to ask this. I know what I did to you was unforgivable. But could we maybe stay here? Just for a few days? Until I can figure out what to do next? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with years of pain and disappointment and betrayal. This was the moment I'd unknowingly been preparing for my entire life. The moment when all those sacrifices, all that unconditional love, all those times I'd chosen her happiness over my own, would either mean something or reveal themselves as the desperate actions of a woman who'd confused enabling with loving. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw not the successful woman who'd been too ashamed to invite me to her wedding, but the broken child who needed her mother more than she'd ever needed anyone in her life. The choice I made next would define both of us forever. I didn't answer Tatum's question immediately. Instead, I stood up from the couch and walked to the kitchen, needing a moment to think. Behind me, I could hear Tatum's quiet sniffling and Justin's nervous shuffling. They were waiting for my verdict, these two people who had delivered the cruelest blow of my life just a month ago. I put the kettle on for tea, my hands moving automatically through the familiar routine while my mind raced. Part of me wanted to throw open my arms and welcome them home, to fall back into the old pattern of making everything better for Tatum no matter what it cost me. But another part of me, a part that had been growing stronger since that terrible morning when Justin destroyed my world, whispered that maybe this time things needed to be different. "Mom?" Tatum's voice came from the doorway. She stood there hesitantly, like she was afraid to enter my space without permission. "Are you okay?" I turned to face her, really studying my daughter for the first time in years. Beneath the exhaustion and the tear-stained makeup, beneath the desperation and the fear, I could see something I'd never noticed before. Or maybe something I'd never allowed myself to see. Shame. Deep, genuine shame. "I'm thinking," I said simply. She nodded and came into the kitchen, sitting down at the same chair where Justin had delivered his cruel news. "I know this is a lot to ask," she began, her voice small. "I know I hurt you. What I did was wrong, and I'm sorry." "Are you?" I asked, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "Are you sorry you hurt me, or are you sorry you need me now?" Tatum flinched as if I'd slapped her. "That's not fair, isn't it?" I poured hot water over tea bags, my movements precise and controlled. "A month ago, I wasn't even worth a phone call to let me know you were getting married. You sent my grandson to tell me about it afterward, and he seemed to take pleasure in explaining exactly why I wasn't good enough to be included. Mom, I can explain, can you?" I set a cup of tea in front of her and took my own seat across the table. "I'd like to hear this explanation. I'd like to understand how the daughter I raised, the daughter I sacrificed everything for, could look at me and decide I was too embarrassing to be part of her special day." Tatum wrapped her hands around the warm cup, but didn't drink. "It wasn't supposed to be like that," she said quietly. "Michael's family. They're old money, Mom. Really old money. His mother has been featured in Town and Country magazine. His father sits on the boards of 3 different charities. They have a summer house in Martha's Vineyard that's been in their family for 4 generations. And they would have looked at you, at this house, at your clothes and your job, and they would have judged us both." Tatum's voice was getting stronger now, as if she was convincing herself as much as me. "I worked so hard to fit into that world, Mom. I studied how they talked, how they dressed, what they considered important. I couldn't risk them seeing where I really came from." The words hung between us like a confession, where she really came from, as if her childhood, her father's death, my years of sacrifice and struggle, were something shameful to be hidden. "So you decided I was a liability," I said. "No, that's not how I thought about it." But even as she said it, I could see in her eyes that it was exactly how she'd thought about it. "Then how did you think about it, Tatum? Help me understand how a daughter decides her mother isn't worth a place at her wedding." She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her tea. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I thought about how different our lives would be if Daddy hadn't died. How we might have been the kind of family that belonged in that world naturally. How you might have been the kind of mother who could hold her own at a country club reception." Each word was a fresh wound. "The kind of mother who could hold her own," I repeated. "What kind of mother was I, Tatum? The kind who worked 3 jobs to keep you in your school district? The kind who sold her wedding ring to help pay for your college? The kind who went without heat in her own bedroom so you could be warm?" "That's not what I meant," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" I leaned forward. "Tell me, what was so wrong with the mother who raised you that you couldn't bear for your new family to meet her?" Justin appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by the tension in our voices. He looked between his mother and me, and for the first time since I'd known him, he seemed uncertain. Mom always said you did your best, he offered weakly. Did your best, I repeated, looking at Tatum. Damning with faint praise, don't you think? Tatum's composure finally cracked. What do you want me to say, Mom? That I was wrong? Fine, I was wrong. That I was selfish and cruel and ungrateful? Yes, I was all of those things. But I can't change it now, and we need help. There it is, I said quietly. The truth. You're not sorry you hurt me. You're sorry you need me. That's not true, isn't it? If Michael hadn't left you, if you were still living in that big house with your rich in-laws, would you be here apologizing? Would you have ever told me about the wedding? Or would you have just let me go on believing we were planning it together? The silence that followed was answer enough. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at my small backyard with its modest garden and the fence that needed painting. It wasn't much, but it was honest. It was real. It was built on sacrifice and love, not lies and social climbing. I want to know something, I said without turning around. When you were planning this wedding, when you were deciding who was worthy of being there, did you ever think about the night your father died? Mom, please don't. Do you remember that night? I continued. You were 12 years old, and you crawled into my bed crying because you were scared. You asked me if we were going to be okay, if we'd have to move, if everything was going to change. I turned to face her, and I could see the memory playing across her features. Do you remember what I told you? Tatum's eyes filled with fresh tears. You said we'd be fine because we had each other. I said we'd be fine because we had each other, I repeated. I told you that as long as we were together, we could handle anything. I promised you that no matter what happened, I would always be there for you. Mom, I kept that promise, Tatum. Every single day for 26 years, I kept that promise. When you needed money for college, I was there. When you got your first job and needed professional clothes, I was there. When you bought your first apartment and needed furniture, I was there. I was always there. My voice was getting stronger now, years of suppressed hurt and disappointment finally finding their voice. But when it was time for you to keep that promise to me, when it was time for you to say we're in this together, you decided I wasn't worth the risk. Tatum was crying openly now, but I wasn't finished. You took everything I gave you, the education, the opportunities, the unconditional love, and you used it to build a life that didn't include me. You didn't just exclude me from your wedding, Tatum. You excluded me from your life. You decided that the woman who sacrificed everything for you wasn't good enough to be seen with you. I never meant it that way, she sobbed. How did you mean it then? Explain to me how a mother who loved you enough to work 4 jobs, who sold her most precious possessions to pay for your dreams, somehow wasn't worthy of a seat at your wedding. Justin stepped forward. Grandma, she's sorry. Can't you see she's sorry? I looked at him, this young man who'd sat in my kitchen a month ago, and taken such pleasure in describing exactly why I wasn't wanted. Are you sorry too, Justin? Sorry for the way you told me? Sorry for how much you enjoyed hurting me? He had the grace to look ashamed. I was angry, he muttered. Angry at what? What did I ever do to you to deserve that cruelty? You made Mom feel guilty all the time, he said, his voice getting defensive again. Every time she tried to better herself, you were there reminding her of how hard you worked, how much you sacrificed. She could never just enjoy her success because you always made it about what it cost you. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I made her feel guilty? Yes. Every conversation was about money and how tight things were for you. Every visit ended with you looking around her apartment like you were calculating how much it cost. She felt like she couldn't enjoy anything without you making her feel bad about it. I stared at him, then at Tatum. Is that how you saw it? Every time I was proud of what you'd accomplished, you thought I was trying to make you feel guilty? Tatum nodded reluctantly. Sometimes it felt like you were keeping score, like every good thing in my life came with a price tag that you'd paid. I sat back down, the weight of this revelation settling over me like a heavy blanket. Had I done that? In my pride over her accomplishments, in my joy at seeing her succeed, had I somehow made her feel like she owed me for her happiness? I never meant to make you feel that way, I said quietly. I was just proud. I was proud that all those years of struggle had been worth something. But don't you see? Tatum leaned forward urgently. It made me feel like I could never really escape, like no matter how far I went or how much I achieved, I'd always be that poor girl whose mother worked multiple jobs. I'd always be defined by struggle instead of success. The kitchen fell silent, except for the tick of the clock and the distant hum of traffic. 3 generations of my family sat around the table where I'd fed them countless meals, and I was finally understanding the depth of the divide that had grown between us. But understanding didn't make the pain any less. If anything, it made it worse, because now I knew that my daughter hadn't just been ashamed of my circumstances. She'd been ashamed of me. The 3 of us sat in the heavy silence, each lost in our own thoughts. Outside, I could hear children playing in the street, their laughter a stark contrast to the weight of revelation that had settled over my kitchen. 26 years of misunderstanding stretched between us like a chasm, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be bridged. So what happens now? Justin finally asked, his voice small and uncertain. I looked at him, then at Tatum, studying their faces. A month ago, they had been confident and cruel, secure in their superiority over my humble life. Now they sat in my kitchen like supplicants, waiting for mercy from the woman they'd deemed unworthy. The irony wasn't lost on me. The power dynamic had completely shifted. I was the one with a home, with stability, with choices. They were the ones with nothing. I don't know, I said honestly. I'm still trying to understand how we got here. Tatum wiped her eyes with a tissue I'd handed her. We got here because I made terrible choices, she said quietly. Because I let pride and shame drive my decisions instead of love. It was the first truly honest thing she'd said since arriving on my doorstep. Yes, I agreed. You did. She flinched at my directness, but didn't argue. But I need to understand something, I continued. If I help you now, if I let you stay here and get back on your feet, what's to stop this from happening again? What's to stop you from rebuilding your life and deciding once again that I'm an embarrassment you need to hide? Mom, I would never. You would never what? You already did, Tatum. You already chose your image over our relationship. You already decided that being associated with me was a liability. I stood up and began clearing the teacups, needing something to do with my hands while I worked through my thoughts. I spent your entire childhood teaching you that family comes first, that we stick together no matter what. And the moment you had a chance at something better, you threw that lesson away. I was wrong, Tatum said desperately. I see that now. Michael's betrayal, losing everything. It showed me what really matters. Did it? I turned to face her. Or did it just show you that the people you chose over me weren't really your friends after all? The question hung in the air, and I could see Tatum struggling with it. Because we both knew the answer. If her rich friends had stood by her, if Michael's family had offered support, would she be here apologizing to me? Or would she still be maintaining her distance, still convinced that association with me would drag her down? I want to believe you've learned something, I said carefully. I want to believe that this experience has shown you the value of real family, of unconditional love, but I'm not sure it has. Justin shifted uncomfortably in his chair. What do you mean? I sat back down, looking directly at him. I mean that both of you are here because you have nowhere else to go. You're not here because you missed me or because you realized you loved me. You're here because I'm your last resort. The truth of it was written across both their faces. And that's not the foundation for rebuilding a relationship, I continued. That's just desperation masquerading as remorse. Tatum's face crumpled. What do you want me to say, Mom? What do you want me to do to prove that I'm sorry? I don't want you to prove anything, I said quietly. I want you to be honest, really honest. Not sorry because you need me honest, but truly honest about why you made the choices you made. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the internal struggle playing out across her features. The old Tatum would have crafted a response designed to get what she wanted, but this new Tatum, stripped of her pretenses and her security, seemed to be grappling with something deeper. I was ashamed, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Of what? Of everything. Of this house, of your job, of the way we used to clip coupons and shop at thrift stores. Of the fact that I wore the same dress to 3 different school dances because we couldn't afford more than one. Her voice was getting stronger, the words pouring out like water through a broken dam. I was ashamed that my friends' parents had college degrees and careers while you cleaned offices for a living. I was ashamed that their houses had new furniture while ours came from garage sales. I was ashamed that they went on vacations to Europe while we considered a trip to the state park a luxury. Each word was a knife to my heart, but I'd asked for honesty, and this was what honesty looked like. And when I finally had a chance to be part of a different world, a world where no one knew about any of that, I grabbed it, she continued. I convinced myself that I deserved better, that I'd earned the right to leave that life behind. And leaving that life behind meant leaving me behind, I said. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I told myself it was temporary. That once I was established in my new life, once I was secure, I'd figure out how to include you without it costing me everything I'd worked for. But that day never came. No. Because there was always something else to protect, some new level to reach where I thought I'd finally be safe enough to be honest about where I came from. I absorbed this, feeling the full weight of my daughter's rejection settle in my chest. She hadn't just excluded me from her wedding. She'd been systematically erasing me from her life for years, always planning to include me someday when it was convenient, when it was safe, when it wouldn't cost her anything. And what about you? I asked Justin. What's your excuse for the cruelty? He looked down at his hands. I guess I absorbed Mom's attitude. The way she talked about this place, about your life, it made me think you were less than. That you were holding us back somehow. Holding you back from what? From being the kind of people we thought we deserved to be, he said quietly. People with money and status and respect. And now? He looked around my modest kitchen, taking in the hand-me-down furniture and the outdated appliances. Now I realize that the only person in this room who actually has respect is you. You're the only one who never pretended to be something you weren't. It was a start, but it wasn't enough. Words were easy when you were desperate. Actions were harder. If I let you stay, I said carefully, there will be conditions. Both of them nodded eagerly. First, this isn't temporary charity. If you're going to be part of my life, you're going to contribute to it. Tatum, you'll find work, any work, and help with expenses. Justin, you'll get a job too instead of depending on family money for college. But his education. Tatum started to protest. His education will mean more if he earns it himself, I cut her off. The way I earned mine through night school while working full-time. The way you should have had to earn yours instead of having it handed to you. They both nodded reluctantly. Second, there will be no more embarrassment about this house or my life. If you're ashamed to be associated with me, then don't be associated with me. Find somewhere else to go. We're not ashamed, Tatum said quickly. Prove it. When people ask where you're living, you tell them the truth. When you eventually start dating again, your boyfriends will meet me. When you find new friends, they'll be welcome in this house. No more hiding. No more making excuses for who I am or how I live. The idea clearly terrified her, but she nodded. And third, I said, my voice growing firmer, we're going to deal with this honestly. No pretending the past didn't happen. No glossing over the hurt with fake pleasantries. If we're going to rebuild our relationship, it's going to be built on truth, not convenience. I stood up again, looking down at both of them. I need time to think about this. You can stay tonight. You can sleep on the couch and the floor in the living room. But tomorrow, I want an answer from both of you about whether you can really live with these conditions or whether you're just agreeing because you're desperate. Mom, Tatum started. No, I said firmly. No more manipulation. No more pulling at my heartstrings because you need something. Think about what I've said. Really think about it. Because if you agree to this and then go back to your old patterns, I won't give you another chance. I walked toward my bedroom, then paused at the doorway. And Tatum, that little girl who used to crawl into my bed when she was scared, she understood something you forgot. She understood that we were stronger together than apart. If you want to be part of this family again, you need to remember that lesson. I closed my bedroom door behind me and sat on the edge of my bed, my hands shaking with exhaustion and emotion. Through the thin walls, I could hear the murmur of voices as Tatum and Justin talked in the living room. probably trying to figure out if they could meet my conditions, but the truth was, I wasn't sure if I could meet them myself. Because as much as I wanted my daughter back, I wasn't sure I could trust her not to break my heart again, and I wasn't sure I was strong enough to survive it if she did. I woke the next morning to the smell of coffee brewing and quiet voices in my kitchen. For a moment, I lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of other people in my house, and I realized how long it had been since I'd awakened to anything other than silence. When I emerged from my bedroom, I found Tatum standing at my stove, carefully scrambling eggs in my old cast-iron pan. Justin sat at the table, his hair still messy from sleep, folding napkins with the concentration of someone who'd never done such a task before. "Good morning," Tatum said softly, not turning around. "I hope you don't mind." I found some eggs and bread, and I thought maybe I could make breakfast. I looked around my kitchen, noting the small changes. The dishes had been washed and put away. The table had been wiped clean. Someone had even taken out the trash. "Thank you," I said, taking my usual seat at the table. Tatum placed a plate in front of me. Scrambled eggs, toast, and a small glass of orange juice. The eggs were perfectly cooked, fluffy and seasoned just right. It occurred to me that I'd never seen Tatum cook before. Not really. During her childhood, I'd been too busy working to teach her, and during her adult years, she'd lived a life where cooking wasn't necessary. "This is good," I said, taking a bite. She smiled tentatively. "I've been learning. When money got tight after Michael left, takeout wasn't an option anymore. YouTube is a surprisingly good cooking teacher." We ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then Justin cleared his throat. "Grandma, we talked last night about your conditions." I set down my fork and looked at both of them. "And we want to try," Tatum said. "All of it. The jobs, the honesty, rebuilding our relationship the right way." "That's easy to say when you're desperate," I pointed out. "I know," she replied. "And I know you have no reason to trust us. But I want to show you something." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small silver object. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized it. My grandmother's locket, the one I'd given to her as something old for her wedding. "I never wore it," she said quietly. "Michael thought it looked cheap compared to the diamond necklace his mother gave me, so I put it in my jewelry box and forgot about it." She opened the locket, revealing the tiny photos inside. One of my mother, one of me as a young woman. But when I was packing what little I could take when we left the apartment, this was one of the few things I grabbed. Not the diamonds, not the designer jewelry Michael had bought me. This, she held it out to me, but I shook my head. "It's yours," I said. "It was always meant to be yours." "I know, but I want to earn the right to wear it again." Her voice was steady, determined. "I want to be the kind of woman who deserves to carry on the legacy it represents." I felt tears prick at my eyes, but I blinked them away. This was a start, but it was only a start. "What about work?" I asked. "What are your plans?" "I applied at 3 restaurants yesterday," Tatum said. "Waitressing jobs. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work, and tips can be good if you're willing to work hard. And I'm going to look for construction work," Justin added. "Start at the bottom, learn a trade. Maybe I'll go to college eventually, but I want to earn it myself." These were good intentions, but I'd learned to be wary of good intentions from my family. And when people ask why you're waitressing instead of working in marketing, when your old friends see you serving their tables, what then? Tatum's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. "Then I'll tell them the truth, that I made mistakes and I'm starting over." "That's humiliating for someone who worked so hard to build a certain image," I observed. "Yes," she agreed. "It is, but not as humiliating as what I did to you." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt like I was seeing a glimpse of the daughter I'd raised rather than the stranger she'd become. "There's something else," Justin said hesitantly. "Something we need to tell you." My heart sank. Here it comes, I thought. The catch, the condition, the real reason they're here. "We've been getting calls," he continued, "from Michael's lawyer. Apparently, he's filing for divorce and claiming that Mom abandoned the marriage. He's trying to get alimony." I stared at them. "Alimony? From her?" Tatum nodded miserably. "He's claiming that since I was the primary breadwinner during our marriage, and since he gave up career opportunities to support my advancement, he's entitled to spousal support." The audacity of it left me speechless. "But he conned you," He used you, proving that in court is going to be expensive, Tatum said. Lawyers, investigators, court fees, money I don't have. I could see where this was going, and my heart began to close up again. Of course there was a financial component to their desperation. So you need money for legal fees, I said flatly. No, Tatum said quickly. I mean, yes, I do need money for that eventually, but that's not why I'm telling you. I'm telling you because I want to be honest about everything. No more secrets, no more lies of omission. She took a deep breath. I could fight it and probably win, but it would take everything I have left. Or I could let him have the alimony and focus on rebuilding my life from scratch. And which are you going to do? Let him have it, she said without hesitation. I don't want anything that connects me to that life anymore. I don't want to spend the next 2 years in court battles and depositions and lawyers' offices trying to protect assets I gained through deception anyway. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation, for the calculated expression that meant she was working an angle. But all I saw was exhaustion and resignation, and something that looked like peace. That's a very expensive choice, I pointed out. Yes, she agreed, but some things cost more than money. We finished breakfast in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. When the dishes were cleared and washed, I made a decision. Come with me, I said, leading them into my small living room. I sat down in my old recliner, the one Tatum had always complained was an eyesore. They perched on the couch, waiting. I have something to tell you both, I began. Something I should have told you a long time ago. I looked at my daughter, this woman who had inherited my stubbornness and my pride but had never learned my lessons about what really mattered. When your father died, I made a choice, I said quietly. I could have remarried. There were opportunities. Good men who would have provided security, who would have given you a more comfortable life. Tatum frowned. You never told me that. Because I didn't want you to feel responsible for my choices. But there was one man in particular, Robert Matthews. He owned a successful accounting firm, had a beautiful house, could have given us everything we lacked. I paused, remembering Robert's kind face, his patient courtship, the way he'd tried to include Tatum in his plans for our future. He proposed to me when you were 15, offered to pay for your college, to adopt you if you wanted, to give us both a fresh start. Why didn't you say yes? Justin asked. Because you didn't like him, I said, looking directly at Tatum. You were so angry about the idea of anyone replacing your father, so determined to keep it just the two of us. And I chose your happiness over my own security. Tatum's face had gone very pale. Mom, I didn't know. You were a child dealing with grief. I don't blame you for your reaction. I leaned forward, but I want you to understand something. I made that choice because I believed that family meant putting each other first. I believed that love meant sacrifice. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where I'd lived alone for so many years. For 26 years, I made choices based on what was best for you, even when it cost me dearly. I taught you that family comes first, that we take care of each other no matter what. I turned back to face them. But I failed to teach you the most important lesson of all. What lesson? Tatum whispered. That love isn't just about sacrifice. It's about respect. It's about honoring the people who love you, not hiding from them. It's about understanding that true wealth isn't what you own, but who you can count on when you have nothing left. The room was completely silent except for the tick of the old clock on my mantel. You both learned the wrong lesson from my sacrifices, I continued. You learned that love meant getting what you wanted without having to give anything back. You learned that my feelings didn't matter as long as your needs were met. Tatum was crying now, but I wasn't finished. But here's what I've learned from all of this, I said, my voice growing stronger. The love that truly changes people isn't the love that gives them everything they want. It's the love that shows them what they need. I walked back to my chair and sat down, looking at both of them with complete clarity. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay, both of you. But not because I'm weak, or because I can't say no to family. You're going to stay because I choose to love you in the way you need to be loved, not the way you want to be loved. I smiled then, and for the first time in months, it felt genuine. You're going to live here, in this house you were ashamed of. and you're going to learn what it means to build a life based on integrity instead of image. You're going to work jobs that humble you and discover that dignity comes from honest work, not prestigious titles. Tatum was sobbing now, but she was nodding too. And most importantly, you're going to learn that the love of a family who knows all your flaws and chooses you anyway is worth more than the approval of people who only like you when you're convenient. I reached over and took Tatum's hand, the same hand that had once been so small in mine when she was afraid. I'm not doing this because I'm weak, sweetheart. I'm doing this because I'm finally strong enough to love you the way you need to be loved, even when it's hard for both of us. She collapsed into my arms then, 28 years old, but crying like the 12-year-old who had lost her father and been so afraid of losing me too. I'm sorry, Mom, she sobbed into my shoulder. I'm so sorry for everything. I know you are, I whispered, stroking her hair the way I had when she was small. And we're going to work through it together. All of it. Justin joined us then, wrapping his arms around both of us, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had my family back. Not because they needed me, but because they finally understood what I'd been trying to teach them all along. Love isn't about hiding from each other's flaws. It's about seeing them clearly and choosing each other anyway. It's about building something real together instead of chasing after things that glitter but have no substance. And sometimes, the greatest gift you can give someone is not what they want, but what they need to become the person they were meant to be. That afternoon, as we sat around my kitchen table making plans for their job searches and discussing how we'd make the living arrangements work, I realized something profound had shifted. The power dynamic hadn't just changed because of their circumstances. It had changed because I'd finally learned the difference between enabling and loving. My daughter was going to have to rebuild her life from nothing, just as I had after her father died. But this time, she wouldn't be doing it alone. And this time, she'd be building it on a foundation that couldn't be shaken by other people's opinions or temporary setbacks, because she'd finally learned what I'd been trying to teach her all along, that the only approval that matters is the approval of people who love you enough to want you to become your best self, even when it's difficult. That night, as I tucked a blanket around Tatum sleeping on my couch and watched Justin settling into the sleeping bag on my living room floor, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. They were home, really home, not because they had nowhere else to go, but because they'd finally learned where they belonged. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.